everyone. It has been a long time since I did History of Horror, and I just want to give you this little introduction while I start painting here, because this is going to be kind of a time-lapse one. But yeah, I didn't mean to take such a big long break between History of Horrors. It just kind of happened. But anyway, we're back, and today we are talking about the creature from the Black Lagoon. This one is quite interesting, and I actually learned a lot researching this, so let's get into it. First and foremost, the first creature of the Black Lagoon was released in 1954, so we're talking about one of our very classic horror movies here. And it kind of goes along with this genre that came about in like the 50s of exploration. Like exploring the Amazon was a very big thing, and I'm not quite sure when one of the Rockefellers did it and never came back, but I think that's kind of what sparked the whole thing, was that he disappeared and people were looking at the Amazon as a potential horror setting. So scientists are in the Amazon and they come across this strange creature that is called Gillman. And interestingly enough, is actually played by two different actors. You had Ben Chapman, who played the creature on land, and then I think it's pronounced Rishu Browning was the underwater creature. So one of them was more skilled in moving in the suit on land. The other was like a diving and swimming expert. When the movie was released, it was first released in Detroit, Michigan in February, which was kind of interesting given the setting. And then it was kind of just released regionally. It wasn't a big blockbuster like some of the other horror movies we've talked about. And it only had a runtime of 80 minutes in 3D and made about $1.3 million. Plot of the movie, like I said, Gillman is discovered by scientists. And basically he doesn't want to be discovered, so he kills almost all of them. But the creature sees this woman and falls in love with her. Her name is Kay, and he ends up stalking her and the boat and team that she is with. He tries to kidnap her twice, but Gillman is captured on the boat. He eventually escapes, but is injured by Kay because she does try to fight him off. And then when the team tries to leave the Amazon, they realize they are trapped because Gillman has slipped away and created a trap so they can't leave. And then Kay is taken by Gillman, so he finally succeeds in having her. The team goes, gets Kay, and the creature is shot. Now we as the audience have to assume that he is dead. All we see is him be shot, and then he kind of sinks into the water, giving this idea of he just dies in the water. And that was basically it. That's all I thought there was to this movie. Like, this was going to be like the quickest History of Horror. It was going to be so fast, and I'd have to add all this filler. But that's not the case. But before we get into the sequels, let's talk a little bit about the inspiration for the movie. It was supposed to be a Beauty and the Beast kind of retelling. The makeup was a combination of prosthetics and makeup. They basically used a head like Freddy Krueger, which I talked all about that makeup in the Nightmare on Elm Street History of Horror, so be sure to check that out. There's a playlist and I'll link it. So it was a cowl, so it slipped over the head, and then the rest of the face was built with prosthetics. This is what creates that very claustrophobic feeling that a lot of actors talk about when working with prosthetics, because everything is so close. Your nose is covered, your mouth is covered, your ears. It's a hard sensory experience. Of course, the water scenes are some of the biggest ones in the movie, and these were all filmed on a Universal Studio lot. Now, if I could time travel, going to a Universal Studio lot and seeing movies being made back in the day, especially horror movies, would just be amazing. But that's where they filmed it. So lots of tanks, lots of sets, lots of flooded sound stages. Filming days were usually 14 hours, and actors had to stay in costume for that entire time because it was too expensive and too hard to take prosthetics off and put them back on. So many actors actually overheated, and when they were in between takes or in between scenes, they would actually get in the water to try and stop themselves from overheating. hard to see with the prosthetics. Their depth perception was very thrown off, and it resulted in the actress who played Kay getting her head scraped against the rocks that they were shooting in for the grotto scenes when she's being carried by the creatures. Underwater, the actor that did it held his breath for 4 minutes at a time, which is crazy to think about. So every 4 minutes, they would have to stop and, get ready to reset and reshoot everything, which I feel like would be so incredibly difficult. And now with CGI, there's ways that you can put people underwater, but back then you were actually in the water. And the water that they were in some of these ponds and lakes that were around the sound studio actually had turtles in them, and the turtles became very aggressive and started biting and tearing the costumes off of the actors playing Gilman. So, like I said at the beginning, I learned a lot about this movie, but one of the biggest things I learned is that there's actually sequels. I thought this was a one and done kind of film, but there is actually 2 sequels. The first one being Revenge of the Creature, and that is from 1955. The creature obviously survives being shot and is captured and taken to be studied. Here, when he's being studied, Gilman falls in love again with a woman named Helen who is studying him. And he escapes his being held, stalks her, and kidnaps Helen. So basically the same thing that happened in the first movie. The creature is shot again and Helen is saved. And the movie is, like I said, basically the same, except it takes place in Florida instead of the Amazon. And little known fact, this movie was actually Clint Eastwood's first movie, but he is uncredited on the IMDb and in the credits. And then there was a third movie that was made called The Creature Walks Among Us, and that came out in 1956. So these movies came out very close together, and kind of told, one big story. The Creature Walks Among Us still took place in Florida. It was in the Everglades, and we see that an abusive husband suspects that a guide is flirting with his wife when they are traveling through the Everglades, and the creature sees this. The creature kind of starts stalking the wife and wants to take her away from her abusive husband. So a little bit more of a complex storyline here, but still very much the same. The wife's name is Marcia, and at one point she gets disoriented while she is diving and almost drowns. Gilman sees this and tries to kind of help her, but he is captured and they try to burn him because they've realized shooting him doesn't work. However, he is treated and starts to become human because they use human skin to skin grafts. I know this is a little convoluted, but stick with me here. It's to turn human and starts to breathe on land. Looks human, but he cannot get rid of his monster-like tendencies. The guide is killed by the husband, and then the creature kills the abusive husband and then goes back into the ocean, and then that's the end of the movie. So kind of a cliffhanger, kind of a does he survive, does he go on sort of thing. However, that wasn't supposed to be the end of The Creature from the Black Lagoon. So like many of the horror movies that we have talked about thus far, especially these older like black and white 1950s ones, there was a plan for Universal to remake this franchise, and it was going to start in 1982, but it ended up being canceled, and there was just kind of no interest in it going forward until 1992, when other studios were pitched the idea and they decided to pass on it as well. And then 1995, some studios picked it up and then decided to not greenlight it, and in 1996, the same thing happened. In the 2000s, there were lots of scripts that were written and passed around Hollywood. Unfortunately, nobody picked them up. And there was actually a script from 2002 that floated around for a long time, and then in 2017 it was actually greenlit and made into The Shape of Water, which won, I'm pretty sure, an Oscar. But it obviously was a very different story than The Creature of the Black Lagoon originally, and it was changed from a horror to a kind of like romance. And in 2020, there was whispers of the movie officially being remade to be a part of Universal's Dark Universe. However, Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson were mentioned to be playing the creature and Kay. However, that movie was put on the shelf and never taken back down. That's basically it. Like I said, there was not a lot for this one. These movies were very innovative for makeup, especially underwater makeup and prosthetics. But unfortunately, because the franchise kind of died out, there's just not a ton of information out there on how it impacted other movies. I'm sure it's had a great impact on underwater filming and, you know, standards around that. But that's it for The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I would love to see them remake this movie. I have not watched this one, but I think right now with Frankenstein getting as much attention as it is, that is going to be our next big horror franchise, and I'm going to talk about that one as well very soon. So, reviving this series, bringing it all back. Hopefully you guys enjoy these. Check out my other history of horror that I have done. Like I said before, I will link the playlist and stuff. My last one was about Scream, and I have a lot more coming. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.